Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. A political game of guess who is playing out in the U.S. Capitol. The New York Times has recently published a critical and anonymous opinion piece on President Donald Trump. It was written by someone identified as a senior administration official. The White House has reacted angrily to the publication. Before we get down to business, let's take a look at this.
A game of whodunit in the White House. A widely circulated newspaper, the New York Times, published an anonymous op-ed. The anonymous author wrote the opinion piece claiming to be part of a group of people working diligently from within to impede President Donald Trump's worst inclinations and ill-conceived parts of his agenda. Trump said it was a gutless editorial and really a disgrace.
Nobody has ever done in less than a 2-year period what we've done. So when you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist. And someday...
Trump also tweeted treason. He described it as an issue of national security and asked the U.S. Justice Department to find out who wrote the piece. The op-ed has put Washington into a political guess-who game as dozens of Trump administration officials lined up denying responsibility. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, suspected by many as the anonymous senior administration official, echoed Trump's remarks to the article. He said no one on his staff was involved with the New York Times piece and also denied involvement in discussions to invoke the 25th Amendment to oust President Donald Trump, as the opinion piece claimed. The Times op-ed follows many articles since Trump's inauguration that have depicted turbulence inside the White House, and it seems the anonymous writer will remain at large.
For more discussion on the White House politics, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Also joining us inside Washington, we have Bruce Fein. He is a former Associate Deputy Attorney General and General Counsel of the Federal Communication Commission, under President Reagan. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. I want to start by asking you, Mr. Fein, about the recent so-called anonymous source on the New York Times talking about the quiet resistance. But many wonder whether it is quiet resistance or the resistance has been too quiet. Mr. Fein.
Well, it could be both. First of all, this is not unique. I was here all throughout Watergate, worked on impeachment. There was someone in the FBI called Mark Felt who was leaking daily information that was incriminating the Nixon administration, and his identity wasn't revealed till 34 years later. So this is not unprecedented by any means. Moreover, I do not believe, having been in this town for as long as I have, and I watch the events daily, as part of my job and otherwise, that there wasn't anything in that op-ed that was unusual, that wouldn't have deduced those who know Mr. Trump's character as what he said in the public domain. It's unusual simply because someone who's working on the staff continues to work despite the obvious disgruntlement with what Mr. Trump is doing. And it's a little bit puzzling to me as to why this individual wouldn't have gone public, would got all the attention in the world, written a book, got millions of dollars, and then being able to exercise his First Amendment rights outside the administration.
Right. It's a very interesting question, isn't it? And therefore, Mr. Rong, the question really is, with so many stories going on, this is only one of those when it comes to the Trump administration. We have witnessed the drop of supporting and approval rating of Trump over the past month has been quite significant. According to 6 to 8 quite respectable polls inside the United States, not just coming from the left, but also coming from the central and the other places, politically speaking, are actually all indicating the approval rating of Trump dropping to 30% something, coming down from 40% something a month ago. What does it say? Is this temporary as a result of all of these things going on? Mr. Rong, your analysis.
Well, I think it's hard to say at this moment, but definitely I think there are some disturbing signs as far as the Trump administration is concerned, that the supporting rate is falling down. But of course, I think there are many factors, I think, contributing to this development. First of all, I believe that the past summer has been pretty rough for President Trump and his administration. And if you look at his former close associates, his former counselors and others, all have been either sort of convicted or pledged guilty. This, I think, undermined certainly his sort of the presidency. And also, I think there are a lot of other sort of developed both at home and abroad that has been raised question marks about the capabilities of his presidency and particularly the style of his administration.
Well, there are a lot of questions, but the question really is whether he is suitable for that job. Many have been asking that question. Well, Mr. Fain, here is the thing. If, as some media analysis have been suggesting, the current White House, there is a quiet coup d'etat that is going on, meaning the officials in some of the most important government offices and organizations try to do their best to prevent some of the most important information going to the White House, let the president see, or having been making their efforts to prevent some of the most important decisions from the president. What does that mean for the governance capability of this president?
Well, it means that it's very limited. Obviously, one man can only make so many decisions, and the information that you've described indicates that others in his inner circle are unwilling to do anything, in fact, try to obstruct what he would want to do, for example, some trade agreements, by removing them from his agenda so that he can deliver all of the sermons he wants from his pedestal, but very little is actually going to happen. Now, I think, however, that Mr. Trump is unique as a president. He doesn't really have any policy strategy other than he needs to be in the limelight 24 hours a day. He's very erratic. I found really the most disturbing things that have all come out is his statement in a rather flip way, could we assassinate the president of Syria? You know, this is the president of the United States. You don't speak in such insouciant terms about killing the head of a foreign country. And that indicates, you know, a quite worrisome, erratic, spasmodic nature when he's dealing with other countries that have nuclear weapons, including North Korea, including the way that he's so impetuous. He then goes out the next day and says there'll be $200 billion additional tariffs on Chinese imports.
But Mr. Fain, you know, the issue is President Trump is well known for his style. And he's in the office is because, like it or not, exactly because of that style. And he's been winning some hearts and minds in the United States. It's because he is that kind of person, at least apparently. So I guess it's double sword, is a double-edged sword, as they say, Mr. Fain.
Well, I think that what works in a campaign doesn't necessarily work in governing. I agree exactly what you've said with regard to exciting his support during the presidential run in 2016. But people look for results when you actually have to govern rather than just speak and excite their emotions. And I believe it does take time for the character issue, the one that was portrayed during his campaign, to seep into the American people. And I think as the governance becomes increasingly erratic, if not paralyzed, because there's so much disarray in the administration, he will then fritter away his initial base, and you've identified is now in the 30s. And it's remember that a plurality of all voters in the United States are independents. They're not Republicans, they're not Democrats. And the independents are the ones that he's likely to lose if he continues in this rather spasmodic mode of governance.
Will the midterm election, Mr. Rong, be one of the most important polls, in fact, that anyone could do about the capability of this presidency?
Well, the midterm election certainly is not directly about President,
of course, not,
President
but
Trump
himself,
but definitely it would tell a lot about his presidency, and it would also have implications, profound implications, about how he is going to govern this country. So I thought that the latest sort of development and the chaos or the bitter division among the administrations, both in terms of style and its policy, is a big issue, I think, and also certainly an issue that is being followed with great interest.
Mr. Fain, you a longtime Washingtonian, so some suggest that what we are seeing today is comparable to the Nixon years, even to the very beginning of the Watergate. If you listen to the Nixon tapes, that certainly now become not secret anymore, but rather public information, you'll find the styles of talking, at least on that tape, pretty much similar to the open conversation that President Trump is having every day, either in his tweet or when he's talking to the press. But Mr. Fain, others suggest, you know, the role of the presidency these days around the world have been changing over the years compared to, let's just say, 20 years ago. So the styles of governance, the styles of personalities, and the charismatism of these state leaders seem to be in a new period right now. So what do you make of those comments, particularly in the case of Donald Trump?
Well, I think that your analogy to Watergate is correct, and I think one of the reasons why the midterm elections is so critical is that an enormous amount of power in the United States turns on Congress overseeing the executive branch and exposing scandals. You may remember that in the Nixon case, it was the Democratic Senate and then the House that moved forward, first with the hearings and then impeachment. Now, if the House of Representatives goes to the Democrats, I think the doomsday clock on Trump presidency is now about 5 minutes to midnight. Because all along during these first 2 years, the Republican oversight has been virtually zero. If anything, they have defended Trump rather than examining the particular allegations of scandal, including the Russian so-called collusion. And if the Democrats get control, that means they have authority to compel the president and the executive branch to respond and to come forth with documents and information and testimony. And if that happens, I think that's the virtual end of the Trump administration. This is a person who doesn't know the difference between truth and falsehood. His own attorney, according to Mr. Woodward, said to Mr. Trump, "You can't be deposed. You're a liar." So that's why the midterm is so critical, and it'll turn this administration into another version of Watergate if the Democrats get control.
I see. Mr. Rong, you've seen some recent dramas going on in Washington over the past 2 weeks, let's just say. You've got the book of coming from the earlier Watergate well-known journalist. Now the book Fear is out, bestseller in many countries. You've also got the eulogies to earlier former presidents, President Obama, President Bush, give at the funeral of John McCain, and also the one that delivered by John McCain's daughter, together with the recent op-ed piece in the New York Times, according to so-called anonymous source in the White House. So what does all of this mean, you know, one layer after another? Is the United States, is Washington now in a soul-searching period of time about the governance that they had over the past few years, or this is pure political fights?
I think certainly it is political, but it is more than political as far as I can see. You are right, as we have over the past few weeks, we've seen a kind of culmination of these concern or that are being expressed, by the former head of the states, politicians, and also now we have the media, which, they are trying to send a strong message that they are very much concerned the way that the United States is being governed, and also at an extension that they also doubt that the competency of President Trump. So, but how to do that? And it seems that it is more remains a kind of a political or by a political issue. So all in all, we will see that how certainly the midterm election is going to, a big sort of a mark that would see how much I think the U.S. politics can make a self-correction to
what is going on over the past few years. Mr. Feng, is this pure political dogfight, or there is really a soul searching that is going on in Washington?
No, it's more than a political dogfight, although that's inherent in politics. It relates to the institutional integrity of our system of justice, freedom of speech, due process, separation of powers. And one of the things I think Mr. Trump is really hurting himself with, but can't be seen immediately, is with the judiciary. You may recall in the Nixon's case, and I was involved in the tapes case and Pentagon Papers, it was so clear in the public mind, including the justices, that he was involved in wrongdoing, that he didn't get a single vote, not one vote in the U.S. Supreme Court when the tapes case got there, even though he had made 4 appointments. And the judges are not stupid, and they read newspapers too. And when you have the judges then seeing someone who doesn't at all appear to act like he's innocent, like he's always threatening the Attorney General, he's going to fire the FBI director, he's going to fire the special counsel. I mean, the judges would look at this if it's done in a courtroom and said, I would draw an inference of guilt. And this means that if push comes to shove, and the case goes to the United States courts and the U.S. Supreme Court on Mr. Trump's requirement to testify under oath to produce documents, he's going to lose. And politically, you cannot flout a federal court order and get away with it. And that would be the end of the presidency if he did that.
Well, Mr. Feng, it seems that you're already having a roadmap for Mr. President to be removed from his office. But I have to say, if you look at the hearing that is going on right now in Washington, Kavanaugh, for example, nominated by the Trump White House to be in the Supreme Court, you have 200 arrests already throughout these hearings about opposition voices to him. But still, it's very likely that he could got his opportunity. So my question really is, this is really about the Trump White House? Or is this really about an America right now that is so divided politically and maybe on many other social issues as well?
Well, I think it's both of those. And I think it's very instructive you called attention to the hearings about the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Because remember, it was controlled by the Republicans. They don't want to shoot themselves by impairing a Republican in the White House. And that goes back to our soundtrack here. The November elections are so critical because until you get the Democrats in control or one of both houses, there isn't going to be the kind of scrutiny that's needed in order to inform the American people what's going on. To them who live outside of Washington, it all is just a black hole. It needs to be on TV, and that's not going to happen unless the Democrats get control of power.
So what does all of this mean for the others? I mean, Mr. Rong, of course, China always say it is your internal affairs. Nobody's going to interfere in your internal affairs. But what does that mean, the connotation of it, for the others? Whether it is U.S. international policy or policies toward China or policies toward the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, for example. As we know, there has been some very interesting exchanges delivered in a letter coming from President Kim to President Trump. So what would all of this mean in the White House calculation and in Washington in general's calculation about policies toward the others?
Well, it is true. I think what happened in the White House and in Washington, D.C. is something kind of internal affairs of the United States. It got to the U.S. American voters to decide, and certainly China does not feel in a position appropriate to intervene or to make comments on that. But having said that, I think the United States, being the sole superpower, has a strong, has such a kind of a responsibility, and of course had whatever policies or whatever the way or style of the administration is conducting its policies will have huge implications, not only for the United States, but more importantly for the world, at large. And the regional issues you mentioned, like North Korea's nuclear issues and also its relationship with countries like China, has been definitely affected by that. And I think it goes two ways, of course. On the one hand, it's kind of uncertainties, unpredictabilities that has been raised, causing a lot of concerns. Of course, the Trump administration, for sometimes they would have said that that also gave them an advantage to kind of keep the opponents or keep the other side off balance. But I think as a whole, it creates more complications and unpredictabilities
and chaos,
exactly.
The solutions. Mr. Fain, to you, what do you think are some of the most important barometers that we need to look at leading us up to the midterm election in the United States?
Well, let me just add this as a preface. It has been historically true with regard to presidents who are under domestic pressure. Nixon, Clinton when he was under impeachment, both of them concocted foreign crises. You remember Nixon went on DEFCON 3 in the Yom Kippur War to distract attention from Watergate. And Clinton was sending rockets into Afghanistan and also into Sudan with the same day that he got impeached. So one of the risks internationally about the pressure on Mr. Trump and his problems is that he could also concoct a crisis. As you've mentioned, it could be in Northeast Asia with regard to North Korea. It could be with Iran. It could be with regard to Syria and greater bombardment there. So that's something that the international community needs to be worried about, because that's happened in every other case. Now, one of the barometers you asked, as we go forward here towards the November elections, that would indicate whether the President Trump is going to be successful here. Right now, the indications are that the Democrats are having much higher turnouts in some of these primaries, that indicating their voters are more animated and getting involved than the Republican voters are. And remember also that at least on the House side, there's a very, very large number, over 60 seats. A vast majority have been created by Republicans deciding not to run for re-election, or they've left office early. That means that it's an open seat. You don't have an incumbent advantage. And there have been a couple of redistricting decisions also, especially in Pennsylvania, that are going to make great opportunities for Democrats. That's what needs to be looked at. On the other hand, we do have a booming economy here. If anything, Trump's shooting himself in the foot by creating these huge tariffs against Chinese imports, which are very competitive and people want to buy. And that's creating some anger, especially about farmers who are then confronting tariffs when they try to sell into the Chinese market. So that could hurt Mr. Trump. But it still remains volatile. But right now, the edge looks like it's to the Democrats if nothing changes between now and Election Day.
All right. Mr. Rong, we only have 30 seconds almost left. To you, even if the administration changes in the United States, that means also a lot of challenges for the other government, because they have to realign once again their policies toward the United States, talk once again some of the important issues, and probably that's also going to be a big challenge for them as well. Mr. Rong, final points.
Yeah, definitely. I think for countries like China, we are looking and watching what is happening there, and try to understand the implication. But more importantly, I think as far as China is concerned, we're just to do our job as planned and well. This is, I think, the most important thing I think China should do.
All right. Everybody should have their own smart choices. Thank you so much for being with us, Rong Ying and Bruce Fain. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you.